Good evening. You're either watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. I'm with David Frank. We are talking national political news of the day. And normally we select our topics a day ahead of time, but we do want to slip in a couple of moments to discuss a remarkable event today. Of course, the Secretary of the Interior, Mayorkas, had been articles of impeachment had been passed by the House, which normally results in a trial in the Senate. And the Democrats in the Senate just shut it down, said, no, we're just dismissing it, almost like a demur. This was a political stunt. There's nothing here. Republicans cried foul. Mitch McConnell is saying this is going to hurt the moderate Democrats. And so basically it's not going anywhere. Of course, he was being criticized for his policies at the border and accusations that he lied to Congress, lied to the Senate, I guess. I'm not sure if he was accused of lying to the House, but any real quick thoughts on this, Dave?
Yeah, actually, I was considering making this my prediction last week. So it turns out that it did play out what I thought was going to happen. Basically, this is a Republican hot-button issue, border security, that they think is like their strongest card they have, basically, nationally, national politics, supporting President Trump's reelection, but just to motivate the base. And I think the underlying problem here is that impeachment is a very serious process. And there were, with the Democratic majority in the Senate, there were just too many ways to deny access to that process. And I think that in short, that the Democrats could sort of stand behind the idea that there's no there, and they had some, support from Republicans behind the scenes to just kind of make this thing go away rather than let it be a political stunt.
Yeah, I mean, basically the message is, you don't get to impeach because you disagree with policy. That's just it, no matter what's going on. All right, the topic we wanted to discuss for the first segment is, are we going to get involved in an expanded war in the Middle East? We, of course, have been talking about this horrific, I don't even know if you want to call it a war at this point. It's a massacre in Gaza. I mean, Gaza is just almost completely destroyed with between 30 and 40,000 people killed, God knows how many injured, and people are starting to suffer for lack of water, food, and medicine. And, we don't even know what the numbers are. But Netanyahu made a decision to attack the Iranian embassy in Damascus, killing, I guess, apparently some Iranian generals, and who were apparently bad news. And we can talk about that as to, whether or not that was legitimate, or, what the importance of that was. But basically, there were several real intense aspects of that. First of all, you're attacking an embassy. It's really bad international protocol to do that. You're supposed to be safe in an embassy, no matter how bad you are. Secondly, it's in Syria. It's not even the country that you've got the issue with. So you're risking aggravating a response from Syria. Apparently, Assad and his people are smarter than not wanting to let themselves get drawn into the war, at least not at this point. Iran is making threats. They did send a whole bunch of drones towards Israel. Most of them were thwarted, apparently with the help of the United States. Biden said despite the other disagreements that have been developing over the policy of the war in Gaza, that the United States would stand with Israel against any attacks on Israel. And it appears that Iran seems to be satisfied with having launched this drone attack on him. Israel's been kind of quiet, and Iran is saying any further attacks and it'll be a lot worse. I don't think there were any casualties or anything from the attacks, but it was certainly a message that, we're from Iran, that we aren't going to just sit quietly and take it. But they didn't exact much of a toll other than to send a message that, we are going to do something. But it was about the same level of when I'm forgetting how to say his name, Solomon was killed by Trump in 2018. It was a token, send a bunch of missiles in, just to show that you can fight back, and then that was it. But the question is Netanyahu does not seem to feel like he's got any limitations on what he can do. Attacking an embassy, the Iranian embassy in Damascus, in order to accomplish some gains at a time when the world is already inflamed against him, and he's already got strained relationships with the allies, even the United States at a certain point. What are your thoughts, Dave?
Yeah, this is a complicated situation, and of course the ultimate consequence in what appears to be just the ongoing slow simmering tit for tat between these two countries is that we all could be brought into, the hyperbole's out there, right? Not just a regional war, but something much bigger, because of the way the sides, break the allies that would be behind, say, Iran would include certainly Russia, if not also, other belligerent actors. But as we saw from what actually happened, Israel does have a coalition of partners that include the United States, France, England, but also Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, Jordan, and so this it's already a regional conflict, but the escalation factor can't be understated. I think one thing to keep in mind to simmer some of the hyperbole, because we are talking about, is the U.S. potentially being drawn into a larger war?
Yeah.
When the events of October 7th did happen, who knew what was going to happen? Israel, for example, a long time ago, I think in the late 70s, if I remember correctly, bombed Iraq's nuclear sites, which is massively provocative to set back their nuclear program. Iran has its own nuclear program. Iran's got proxy allies, like we talked about in the past, Lebanon, Hezbollah there, Houthis in Yemen, and of course Hamas in Palestine. So all the pieces are there for something to be awful. But as we saw after October 7th, when the U.S. put a aircraft carrier group right off the coast to kind of make sure that there was no larger war, Iran acted rationally. They were a rational actor. And the proxy war stayed simmering. Nothing massive and belligerent happened. And I think that's sort of what we saw again here, where because of arguably because of domestic politics in both countries, there's posturing, but not a lot of direct confrontation.
Yeah, I remember that 1981 attack.
81.
Right. And I remember there was a lot of discussion. Well, Iraq was just trying to establish nuclear power, not nuclear weapons, all kinds of stuff. And there was a lot of discussion in left-wing policy journals that this was actually a proxy attack, because the United States couldn't do it because there would be all kinds of it would lose credibility with a lot of allies in the rest, but Israel, they don't have credibility anyways because they act up and they're known for acting up, so they could go ahead and do it because they could weather the criticism, even though it was United States and other European intelligence that led to that type of thing. I don't think this was the case this time around. It may have been international intelligence that revealed whoever was in the embassy, but it seems pretty clear that Israel acted on its own in this situation, and because nobody else wants to inflame it anymore. There are protests in every country, including this one. I mean, we've seen some pretty extreme stuff domestically already just this week. People going onto the Golden Gate Bridge and parking their cars in the middle of lanes and throwing their keys over the side into the water and blocking 880. And then, unfortunately down in Fresno, a woman being arrested for making death threats against the city council members, carrying it a little far. I mean, it's getting kind of intense, and it's probably going to be intense in European countries as well. And so the ratcheting it up isn't helping anybody, except Netanyahu, who has nothing to lose from it, because the people protesting there are protesting him because he's been ineffective at bringing the hostages home when, he's apparently the military's accidentally killed a few. So, whatever Biden and the other leaders are going to do, they got to be more firm than they've been, and maybe stop sending weapons for a while. I mean, I'm sorry, it's just and we've talked about it, the Haaretz article and everything. Well, it'll be worse if they have to resort to their larger weapons or something like that. But Biden can't be out there saying, "Oh, we were 100% behind Israel." And it's like, you can say that. You can say we're behind Israel, but we don't support the crazy guy that's running Israel right now. You can say that. But it's a very unfortunate situation. And it's really probably the only thing that's jeopardizing Biden's reelection.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's massively unfortunate, and it is, ironically, hugely putting him in jeopardy because of not just on the resentments writ large on the global stage about the lack of leadership in helping to resolve the plight of the Palestinians for decades now. Situations like this are windows of opportunity for bold leadership, and we're seeing a lot of really status quo behavior, unfortunately. So I think that the threat from the left really, really could undermine his success in the election, and it can't be understated, although people try not to. Also, I think that there's just like this underlying thread of kind of not being candid about what's actually happening to the Palestinian people. Like it leaked out this week that United Nations. Well, I'll talk about the United Nations first. That didn't leak out. The United Nations has said that the Israeli activity to assassinate Iranian military leaders on a diplomatic base or adjacent to it, regardless of whether it was on the premises or that's just where a space that diplomats use. It's a violation of the same treaty that Israel and Iran, and Syria are all part of. So that United Nations human rights leaders have come out and said this is probably a war crime, which segues, or certainly a violation of international law. Which, like I was starting to say earlier, leaked out this week that the New York Times has a style guide that they put out for journalists, where there are certain words, terms, coverage angles that are off limits. So even if you're if you speak to an expert and the expert uses these terms, like genocide, like war crimes, like occupation, those things are not welcome in the pages of the New York Times. So it's not doesn't go unnoticed that the dialogue is disingenuous or for lack of a better word, not helpful. If we can't talk about what's really happening, what experts really think, that's a problem. I do think, I know we have limited time left here with this topic. It's just such a serious one that I think it's worth mentioning too here, that where are we, right? This has been over 6 months that this has been happening.
Yeah.
I don't know if I mentioned this on this show before, but there was a thing in the news recently, or, the last month or so, where there was a child that was abandoned by their parents in the United States somewhere for a vacation, some frivolous, tragic story. The child starved to death in 10 days. The child was dehydrated and dead after 10 days of being left alone. So if you have 1 million or 1.5 million people, 400-ish thousand children on the verge of starvation, every 10 days that they go without food and water runs the risk of being, terminal.
Yeah.
So time is not on the side of scarring an entire region for and in the history will not be kind to people who don't step up and exhibit leadership.
No, you can actually go maybe a week without food, even as a child, but the water, you can't go more than a couple days without water. I mean, that's that and there's problems with the water because they are bombing the water system. And then when you have the hard right Israelis protesting and blocking aid trucks going in, I mean, that is, I don't. I actually don't agree with the use of the word genocide until I see that. I mean, how else can you define that intent? They're saying that everybody there is an enemy, including all the children, because there's no other way to interpret that act. But I do,
Sorry to interrupt you, but just to say it out loud, we're talking about collective punishment, which is listed
yeah,
in the convention. So sorry, go ahead.
right. I mean, the problem with the whole genocide debate is we spend more time arguing
Yeah.
over whether or not the word is appropriate than talking about what's actually happening on the ground. And so it's horrific enough. We don't really need to argue over a word. We need to show the pictures. That's the pictures will speak for themselves, and there needs to be more pressure to put an end to this. And anyway, to answer our initial question, I don't think it's likely that we'll get drug into a larger war, because I don't think this isn't 1967 or 1973. I don't think the other countries are really interested in going to war over it. Jordan is actually shutting down the Palestinian demonstrations in their country. I'll let you say a few quick words to close this out.
Yeah, final quick thoughts on this, really, really quick. I just think that to be continued. We'll see if rational actors prevail, if leadership steps up, and if we're able to really get to the heart of the matter instead of talking about it like it's regime change is on the table.
I just graduated from high school, and it looks like the judge will not let me go to the graduation of my son, who's worked very, very hard. He's a great student. Very proud of the fact that he did so well, and I was looking forward for years to have graduation with his mother and father there. And it looks like the judge isn't going to allow me to escape this scam. It's a scam trial. If you read all of the legal pundits, all of the legal scholars today, there's not one that I see that said this is a case that should be brought or tried. It's a scam. It's a political witch hunt. It continues, and it continues forever. And we're not going to be given a fair trial. It's a very, very sad thing. This is about election interference. That's all it's about. Thank you very much.
So finally, one of Trump's criminal trials has started. Not an indictment, not motions and arguments, but a Trump criminal trial has actually started. They are still selecting a jury. The first day, almost the whole panel seemed to get dismissed because they're trying to find people who aren't biased. And how do you find? They need 12 main jurors, and I think they're going for 6 alternates. So basically, 18 Americans in New York City who are not biased or ready such that they can be impartial on that jury. And how are you going to find that? I couldn't be on that jury. I wouldn't be, unbiased. I mean, I could try to be as reasonable as I could, but I've already found him guilty in my head based on the evidence that I've seen. It seems plain as day. So, but this is the difficulty. So they were clearing out scores of people who are biased one way or another. The jury questionnaires focused on QAnon and things like that, but not so much on what their political affiliations were. But they came out anyway in the discussions. A little bit of an intrigue happened when one of the reporters reported that Trump had nodded off during the morning session, and then apparently he glared at her later, and there's debates as to whether or not he actually did fall asleep. Of course, and then there's complaints from the Biden camp saying, if Biden had fallen asleep, he'd be covering this for a month and every angle of it, but Trump does it, and then people just shrug. But anyway, but by the end of yesterday, 7 jurors were picked, and some very interesting people, including 2 of them attorneys, which is just insane to me. I don't want attorneys on my jury. It's just unless I've got a really complicated argument and I want somebody to explain it to jurors because it's a difficult concept. But you're taking a real chance. And there are actually 2 on there so far. So the jury selection went on today, and real quickly, I'll turn it over to you in a minute. But he's complaining about the fact that he's limited, that each side is only limited to 10 peremptory strikes. So basically, when a juror comes up and for consideration, you can have up to 10 people that you say, I just don't want that person on, and you don't have to provide a reason. They can be off. Once you use up those 10, then you got to have a reason. So you got to prove their bias, and that's a difficult thing to do. And he's complaining, this is the worst venue in the world. It's not. California, it's 10 for criminal cases, 6 for civil cases, and you don't want to use your 10th or your 6th pick because you don't know what's coming next. You really only want to use that if you really desperately need to get rid of somebody. But I think they've used up most of theirs, and the prosecution is used up, and it's coming down to the point where they're just going to have to start accepting people unless they can get them off of that. But it's all basically the judge is moving the case along, wants to be done with jury selection by Friday, wants to have opening arguments Monday morning, and he's not putting up with anything. There's a contempt hearing about the gag order coming up next Wednesday that Trump has to answer to, and he's got to be there, or he could be held in contempt and sent to jail. He's been told he can go to jail if he doesn't show up. So a lot happening.
Yeah, I think that's unfortunate that this is the one trial that comes first and the one that kind of is getting so much attention now, because there's a lot of, I guess, more interesting and for the purposes of the election that's upcoming that have to do with some of Trump's other behavior. But this one, I think, is a little bit of an open and shut case to the extent that, if you revisit the timeline of how this was really campaign activity leading up to the 2016 election. So there was Trump met with people in 2015, and they call it catch and kill campaign, where anytime you get wind of a story that could be damaging to a campaign, you enter into some contractual agreement to buy the rights to it, so it never sees the light of day to be disruptive to the campaign. And so because it's like a campaign strategy and a campaign plan, I mean, I guess that's what the court's going to adjudicate here. Once they kind of turn the corner on that, Trump's already admitted to what happened, and he tweeted it out. He explained it. He just basically said, like, I had a contract with my lawyer, and the details are, even though the payment was, I think, $140,000, a total of $420,000 exchanged hands through fraudulent invoices between Cohen and Trump. So yeah, it was monthly checks for $35,000 for a long time. So it's and Cohen's already gone to jail for this. So if you think about it, it's one of those things where there's not a lot of wiggle room. Trump doesn't have a lot of wiggle room here. So I think that's why so much of this is happening in the court of public opinion.
Right, but it's a complicated one, and a lot of people aren't going to even understand what he was convicted of.
Yeah. Well, it's 34 felonies because of the nature of the beast, right? Like the false business records that are allegedly, campaign finance violations. And I think it's a small technical matter once they get to the fact that, Cohen already pled guilty to it because it is what it is. But that said, I think it's, really it's more for our purposes, it's about what's the national impact? How's it going to affect the election? And so I think, there's this sort of psychological side of it, where Trump is really now required by law to spend his Mondays, Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Fridays in court. And that's going to really put a big crimp in his style. He's really kind of what's the word? Blocked in, and when the things that he can and can't say about it, if he and during it, and so if he's been threatened already, that if he's disruptive or absent, that he could serve out the duration of the trial from a jail cell. So that's not, it's, I think, like I said, from a psychological perspective, it's really gonna hit him hard, and he's not gonna like it in any way, shape, or form. It might even be, resulting in something that we can't imagine, which is maybe lashing out and actually being belligerent and challenging the courts to do something. I suspect that he'll know not to do that. But then there's little things too that came up. For example, like you had mentioned, the jury process, where a lot of the jurors were rejected because of their social media posts. So he was sort of seeing some of these jokes for the first time, and that has to really crimp his style, or step on his ego a little bit. I'm sure that's not great. And again, that could lead to like this what's it called, this reserve power, right? Like he could be building up the Jack in the Box energy to lash out because of resentments. We're not sure about this. And then so finally, I think he allegedly made comments to one of the jurors, the potential jurors. But the judge didn't hear what it was exactly, so just made a point that, hey, like even whispering things to jurors, if the juror says you threaten them, I didn't hear it, but there's that kind of sort of tightrope that he's walking in terms of how he normally
in
conducts himself.
California, you're explicitly told you can say good morning or good afternoon. That's it.
Yeah. And yeah, I'll hand it over to you, but I think that's where we find ourselves, is that this is not, I think the public has already kind of made up their mind about whether it's legitimate or excessive or politically motivated. But in reality, I think it's really just a sort of a reckoning for acts and deeds that seem to be historically accurate.
Yeah, I mean, he's pursuing the line that this is somehow Biden is responsible for this, that Biden has ordered the the DOJ to file these charges. I mean, quite frankly, if Biden was behind it strategically, the other ones would have been filed first, right? To go in that order. This is one of the more esoteric ones. Ironically, it is going first, but he didn't want any of them going. And it will make the other judges look bad if this one goes and those get hung up into perpetuity, right? So it's this guy is moving it along. He's not letting it get dragged out. There was fear that the jury selection alone was going to get dragged out for weeks. He's not letting that happen. And so and Trump is being his usual self, trying to say he's above the fray. This is all beneath him. He shouldn't even have to be there. Blah blah blah. Of course, what the media is waiting for is the moment that Cohen goes on the stand. That's going to be the big drama, Shakespearean drama there. I mean, so but that's probably a little ways off. And so we're just waiting. But one of the things is that most people might not care much about it now, but there is a possibility. There are people who have said in the polls that support him that they might reconsider it if he is convicted of a felony, and that actual conviction might be kind of a snapping point. We'll find out. We don't know. Where it's like, okay, they might not even understand the crime, but a felony? That's a big deal. It's not a misdemeanor, where you got caught drunk driving or something like that, or you shoplifted or something like that, which you could probably get away with. It's a felony, and it's going to highlight certain things during the trial, that he had an affair, that he tried to suppress, the vote. It's going to bring this stuff back about and raise a lot of questions that he didn't want to have be made public again, and for discussion again. So it's definitely not going to help him. that this
Right.
trial is happening. It might not hurt him as much as the other trials, but it's not going to help him. And yeah, I don't see how he defenses this
Right.
because it's pretty straightforward. And probably shouldn't be taken to trial. Probably should be plea bargain if this was an ordinary case.
Yeah, I think there's one last. You said there's a Shakespearean drama element to it, and I think that the how it kind of built up and built up and built up is something that you could see. I talked to. I'm in Florida now still, and I spoke with some conservative folks and some Republican folks, and for them, is about the drama side of it more than the substance. In part because the Manhattan DA at the time, last year, 2022. Cy Vance said he was not going to proceed with the grand jury,
Right.
but then Alvin Bragg ran for office, the DA, saying that he pledged to focus on this, and he got elected. In fact, two members of his staff who were running the investigation resigned because he didn't proceed quickly enough. But so there's that drama piece of it, on both sides. But again, trying to give Trump the benefit of the doubt, like what's he going to say? There have been here and there, like one of the federal former Justice Department civil fraud investigators joined the team, Matthew Colangelo, and documents were released late in the late discovery inadvertently, from those documents came from, I believe, from federal prosecutors. So there, to the extent that everybody says, "Hey, look, Biden had nothing to do with it. It's a state charge," and these are not, all these cases are not being coordinated. There has been some personnel overlap, and there has been some, at least coincidences, we'll call it, that give data points to people who say, look, the deck is stacked against this guy. But then the argument, what I've said to them is, well, you could understand how the deck would be stacked against him because of this. Look at the nature of what's happening. The sitting president is being challenged by a former president who had the January 6th issue events surrounding his departure. Like this, it's no wonder that this is becoming a Shakespearean drama, as you said.
It is, and Cohen is a personality, so that's going to get attract attention. This is a very interesting trial that way. Will it sway anybody at this point? No, yeah.
No, oh, you're asking me. I don't think so. I think, yeah, I will give credence to what you did say, which is that some significant portion of people said, well, if Trump ever really does get convicted of crimes, then I'd consider those realities when they come. So yeah, there's a marginal difference that comes from this playing out, but the appeals will last a long time, and it probably won't happen timely enough to whatever outcome happens, whatever court revelations, sensationalizations, as long as Trump doesn't do something massively belligerent to undermine his credibility, I think he can continue on this path. I said last week he's got a superpower. He can read tea leaves. He's really good at reading tea leaves. He knows what to say to people. He's got that sixth sense when it comes to his political base, and I think so far so good.
That's what makes me wonder, because he's in kind of a panic over this. And he does have a good feel for it, and he's not comfortable with what's happening or what could happen. I mean, sure, he can appeal, but the impact of the verdict itself, even if it's later overturned, I don't know. Could it be a turning point? And I talk about independents, but independents probably aren't going to vote for him anyway. He's trying to build new base, bring in new low information voters to come in and vote for him. That's basically his strategy at this point. He's hoping he can do enough in the right states to pull it off. I don't think he's even playing for the center anymore, and so so he's probably lost most of those voters anyway. But I just, I don't know. I don't know that it would affect a large number of people, because I just don't know that they're going to understand this crime enough to really feel like it. The difference between Iran Gate and Watergate, everybody understands breaking an entry, but breaking the Bolin amendments, violating them to get money to the Contras, that was esoteric. It's I don't see it.
It's really white rural resentment, which is a known, measurable, quantifiable term in the social science literature among sociologists and political science. It's been measured by people like Catherine Kramer in her book, The Politics of Resentment, about rural voters in Wisconsin. We don't really use the word rage throughout. We're talking about white rural resentment, which is a demonstrable and quantifiable. In those clips, everybody remembers those, right? Because a Democrat said something that, taken out of context or clipped in some way, could be seen as really uncomplimentary to people who live in small towns or rural voters, and they got no end of grief for it. Republicans can say things that attack people in cities and the people who vote for Democrats all the time, and nobody ever blinks an eye, and in fact, they often get rewarded for it. And you can play that clip from Barack Obama. If you look at the whole thing, what he said was that people in small towns and rural areas have felt like both parties aren't providing them the benefits that they deserve. They're not helping them economically, and that's why they turn to these kind of culture war issues.
So I wandered onto the New Republic site this last week, and I came across an article that intrigued me. It's entitled "An Honest Assessment of Rural White Resentment is Long Overdue." And it's a kind of a follow-up article over a book that some of the authors associated with the New Republic wrote entitled "White Rural Rage." I have not had a chance to read it yet. I am going to read it, but it's basically suggesting it basically covers the heaviness of the racism in the reactions of rural white working class Americans, and it's being attacked as kind of elitism, kind of, along the lines of Clinton calling them all, what was their term? Deplorables, right? And it was being seen as playing into the urban liberal elite rejection of the unwashed masses kind of a thing. But they write a very interesting defense. They're not saying we're going to write them off, but they are kind of implying an almost kind of a conservative element of individual agency in terms of how racism and other types of bigotry are embraced by these groups who are targeting the wrong people. And we talk about this all the time. It's it goes back to the origin of the labor movement, where the labor movement was weakened because it would go against Chinese and black workers before it would actually go against the people that were depriving them of their wages. I mean, they would allow their racism to be played against them in breaking strikes until the 1930s, when the longshoremen invited black workers into their strike. Later on, the UAW did against Ford. But it is, this is key. Racism is something that is offered to the overseers because at least they can feel like they're above somebody, that kind of a thing. I'm going to let you cut into this because this is a very complex topic. The question is do we blame working class people for their bigotries? And it's kind of a slippery slope, because then do we stop at white working class people? And I'll get to that in my response, but I want you did read the article and you even listened to a podcast. I want to have you kind of introduce the topic.
Sure, no problem at all. So one of the co-authors, Tom Schaller, he actually was on a podcast with Ohio County, I forget which county, chair of the Democratic Party, formerly chair of the Republican Party in his county, a farmer, and so they were talking about the book White Rural Rage, and the article that you shared with me I feel like it kind of it whet my interest, so to speak, piqued my interest. Because really the author was responding to the criticism, heavy criticism from various places, various scholars about their book, rather than actually going to the content of their book. So there was a defensiveness, this reactionary defensiveness. And so the New Republic article speaks to that, basically that the criticism out there is that these are elites that don't know rural reality. to a certain extent. So in Politico and in the Atlantic, and there's lots of people who are saying, hey, they don't get it right in the book. That's the premise without actually that's the critique rather without actually speaking to what their premise is. And so that what they say, in this article is that while the rest of the country has shifted away from supporting Donald Trump, rural whites actually moved towards him by a significant amount. In the 2016, about 62% supported him, but then by 2020, 71%. In the 100 counties where Trump did best, he got the higher percentage of the vote in like 91 of them, higher percentage in 2020 than he did in 2016. So despite January 6th, despite his track record, we see that he got enhanced support. So they explore in that article, they're exploring the idea that there's well, what else explains this resentment and this otherization of coastal liberal elites who are coming in and analyzing what this is all about. The the idea that white rural rage, like there was a reactionary response to that. But I'm going to tell you, I'll be brief. I'll try to be brief. That in fact, if it's not, you're not going to go after their argument. It's a empty reactionary critique. In fact, the premise of the book is that rural white people have been an essential minority in all the ruling coalitions in United States politics since the Jacksonian democracy in the 1830s.
Yeah.
Realistically, aristocrats ruled America, in our first 50 years, but Jackson, broke through, and since that time, rural folks have had a seat at the table, all the tables, non-landing owning males, lower education males, people that had never had the franchise on Earth, right? In modern societies, modern civilizations. So that continued through the Lincoln era. It continued through the McKinley era. It continued through the 20s and 30s. And fast forward a little bit to the 60s. By the 60s, something significant happened, and that is that more women were participating, more minorities were participating, and just as a mathematical reality. With more women and more non-whites making up a greater share of the electorate, we do see a change. And in fact, this realignment, the author says by about 1968, that's when there was a significant realignment. And since that time, 70% of the time, we've had divided government. Rural America only makes up 20% of the population, and only 15% of them are white, 3/4 of the rural population. So this is what they're targeting. They're saying that there is a rational basis for rural rage. We need to talk about that.
Yeah, but as people have said, they're going after the wrong people. I think there's a great paragraph in there, and I'll try to find it out, but find it later. But this is the Democratic Party has lost the white working class, and we talk about how we shouldn't be talking about the using the term white working class, but maybe we need to use it until we figure this out, and it goes into the nuances of what do we even mean by rural, first of all, and the rest. And the interesting thing is that Biden actually increased his support, increased the support of working class white people from 2016 to 2020, but it was with the more urban union people, and so it's very interesting. Unions have been pretty good at countering that, at least they used to be, at least in the 1930s with the development of this CIO. We don't have time to go into all that. But this is the point that they want to make in the article. What isn't said enough is that rural whites are being told to blame all the wrong people for their very real problems. We argue in the book, Hollywood liberals didn't destroy the family farm. College professors didn't move manufacturing jobs overseas. Immigrants didn't pour opioids into our rural communities. And critical race theory didn't close hundreds of rural hospitals. When Republicans, politicians, and the conservative media tell rural whites to aim their anger at those targets, it's so they won't ask why the people they keep electing haven't done anything to improve life in their communities. I mean, that's the heart. That's the point point that they're trying to raise. Not that these people should be written off, but that we need to be more direct about it. And this is, and how to do that without being condescending and dismissive and using terms like deplorables or get over it and all that kind of stuff is yes, the oppression is real, but it's we do need to discuss, does poverty cause or at least greatly enhance racism? But I do want to raise a question here, because when you start to go down this road and say they are individual agents of their racism and how they react to it, I mean, I did a couple of years ago, there was a long sequence of anti-Semitic violent attacks on the Eastern Seaboard. And I was curious as to what the demographics of that was, so I wasn't finding it anywhere. So I went and found all of the newspaper articles, and of the 33 or so attacks I could find, there were photographs or identifications of the ethnic backgrounds of about 28 of them. And of them, one was white. About a third of them were of Arabic origin, and 2/3 were black. And so if we start to go down this road, how far do we carry it? Do we want to assign individual agency and start, talking about blaming Black communities for anti-Semitism that's worse than other communities, or for that matter, the attacks on Asian people, which is disproportionately Black, or the fact that, when we talk about how many deaths, murders of trans people there are, do we really want to discuss who actually is killing them? I mean, it's really a tough discussion. And do we really want to open it up? And can we contain the discussion of that, and how do we do that? Dave?
Yeah, I think one way to, and again, you and I talked about doing a more extensive discussion about this book, because it opens up a bunch of different mutually interesting pathways of conversation. But one of the ways that the author and in that podcast, the host, one of the things they talk about is one of the key words in MAGA is again. And that nostalgia sanitizes the past. So if you really don't think too much about the immense amount of progress that we've made over time for pluralism to set in and thrive, then you really are saying I'm basically worse off than I was, and it has to be them. And that's why about 80, not that it's causal, but coincidentally or in support, about 8 out of 10 rural people say that you're more likely to meet a real American in a rural community than elsewhere in America. So there is and who even knows what that means? But if you self-report that that's how you see the world, it's telling. But I think one of the elements that they brought up, which is really interesting, is that people think that Washington D.C. imposes solutions and benefits, and that it's distant, and that it's insulated, and that they've kind of lost the capacity to lead. And arguably, they're not wrong, right? So then the question is, well, what do you do about it? What do you attribute it to? What are some of the benefits that could be had from it? And one big one is that the concept of what would it take for people to thrive in rural areas and not be exhibiting sort of that brain drain that happens from when people go seek out high tech or basically global jobs or high paying, well paying jobs in more urban areas. The way you could combat that is we saw it during COVID is remote work. So who's out there trying to get rural broadband to as like rural electrification brought power and light to every home in America, or that every home within reason that wanted it. Broadband ought to be viewed like that, because it allows not just working remotely but educational opportunities, access to healthcare, all sorts of ways to make people's lives better. This is one example. The author said that they tried not to get too involved in solutions because they really just want to point out the reality of the sort of the sociological phenomenon. But he did reference, and I'll just say this real quick and just tack it on, and we can talk about whatever angle you choose after this. But the idea that the culture war from that, national parties are able to benefit from the culture war because it meets their ends about motivating and inspiring their base to
Yeah.
show up and vote in the way that they want. That discourages people from civic participation. It poisons civic communities. It's actually bad for people. They turn against each other, and that those culture war items are not how we make progress. Things like rural broadband, things like reproductive health education and choice, and things like fully funded public education. Those are the big three things that experts agree would be necessary to revitalize rural communities. But so that's the standard by which any political actor, the policy outcomes, the solutions, that's kind of what they were pointing to, is that that's the way people ought to be thinking about things in their hometown and in their state, as opposed to paying so much attention to what's coming out of Washington.
Yeah. I really want to quickly address the fact that, why conservative politics it so often defeats liberal or left-wing politics, and it's been pointed out by people who are left-wingers, neurologists who are left-wingers, who frame it in their own science. They say the left very often tries to appeal to the frontal lobe of the brain, to the reason, to the powers, but we aren't always motivated by that. It's the frontal lobes are very easily overridden under stress and fear. And so, I'm not going to say that's universal. The left can make use of its hyperbole and fear mongering as well, but it tends to really play well in culture politics of the right to appeal to the medulla oblongata at the back of us, the lizard brain, as we call it. To where you're basically under experiencing fear and anger and more susceptible to authoritarianism and to wanting to be led to safety. We do need to take a look at this and to see how it is, but that is so condescending if we're talking about it in terms of that. And yet, I don't know, how sometimes reality is condescending. So we got to find a language to discuss it, and that is the hard part. And I'm going to let you close out on this.
I'll be real quick, and thank you for bringing this up. I'm glad you pointed the article in our direction, because this is something we need to talk about in our own community and in communities across the country. So the author who was on that podcast, his name's Tom Schaller, and again, the book is called White Rural Rage. One of the things he points out, and the host of the podcast mentioned too, is that the book is filled with things that are talking about tendencies, trends, observations, sociological kind of movements, distancing from individuals, distancing from blaming people, calling people out, saying this affects everybody, blanket, resentment, you're all this or you're all that. But it gets lost in translation when people are intending it to do so.
Eeny, meeny, chili, beany, the spirits are about to speak.
Are they friendly spirits?
Friendly? Just listen.
Well, this brings us to predictions. Dave, what do you have for us?
So I'll keep it short. Speaker of the House, Mike Johnson, has signaled that he's going to release a $95 billion foreign aid package in parts. It's basically a repackaged version of the Senate bill that was supposed to be comprehensive for both foreign aid and also border security. And I think what he's floating is that they will include some GOP-backed provisions on border security. And now my prediction is that there will be sufficient Democratic support to move the package through, because it's a win-win for vested interests in DC. And unfortunately, there may be a call to trigger him to oust him rather as the speaker. But in fact, I think he'll get enough Democratic support for this good faith effort towards advancing the agenda that he'll maintain his role as speaker.
Okay, I am going to make a couple of Senate predictions here, and then open up for a future discussion about Maryland, because I don't know what's going to happen there. Hogan is ahead of both of his potential Democratic rivals, and by significant numbers in some of the polls, although that's a fluid situation. But the Republicans had held some hope that McCormick might be able to defeat Casey in Pennsylvania. Not happening. The polls are just one after another in favor of Casey. He is long entrenched and has his support there. And then the Republicans were also really hoping to have make inroads in Arizona. And some of the initial polls after the race was settled showed that Lake was kind of close with Gallego, the Democrat Gallego, but it hasn't been happening in the last few polls. I mean, Noble Predictive Insights has Gallego ahead by 10. The RCP average is 6, and that's probably going to get even bigger. And the fact that of this ruling of Arizona, of this archaic law that we discussed last week pertaining to abortion, the fact that abortion is going to be on the ballot, and the fact that the Arizona Republicans doubled down and blocked the Democrats from repealing that law, I am predicting that the Gallego is going to win that election in Arizona come November. I know we're months out, but I just don't see a winning path for Lake at this time. We will find out, though. I could be wrong. I've been wrong before. So until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.